How's it going, everybody? My name is Rinzler here, back again for another video, and welcome back to my Tim Burton Batman series. Now, in my last episode where I discussed why I thought Michelle Pfeiffer was the best Catwoman of all time, which I recorded on my 18th birthday, I mentioned that I was planning on making a video talking about why I thought Michael Keaton was the best Batman of all time, but I've decided that that video would actually be a tad too short. Because I didn't want to talk so much in detail about the main character of a franchise because I thought that'd be a bit spoilerific. So I decided that video would have been fairly short anyway, and so I decided to combine it with my planned follow-up video, which is why I love Batman Returns so much, why I think Batman Returns is the absolute best Batman movie of all time, and why I think it is the best superhero movie of all time. Well, actually, I'll sidetrack. There's been a lot of great superhero movies, but this is definitely the best Batman movie of all time, and it's one of my favorite movies, period, of all time. And I'm going to talk about why. So without further ado, why is it so good? First of all, I have to talk about the pacing in this movie. This movie clocks in at a total of 2 hours, and yet somehow doesn't feel long at all. In fact, none of this movie feels all that long. There's so much going on in it that you never feel bored watching it. In fact, sometimes I find myself deliberately hitting pause or rewinding because I don't want it to end yet. Despite this movie being so long, it's paced so well that you don't even notice. The music. Man, I could talk about the music in this movie all damn day. Tim Burton just never feels the same without Danny Elfman doing the score. When I think of Edward Scissorhands, I think of Danny Elfman's music. When I think of the Spider-Man trilogy, I think of Danny Elfman's music. His music always makes any movie feel like an experience. Just when I thought that the animated series had the best opening Batman theme, I watched Tim Burton's Batman movies, and the music just blew me away. So many scenes in this particular movie wouldn't be nearly as memorable or badass without Elfman's rousing score to back it up. He can make things grand and epic, but also slow and meaningful. The romance scenes between Selina and Bruce in this movie are only enhanced with that beautiful music in the background that just makes Gotham City feel so alive. The various tones. This movie covers a lot of different tones all at the same time. It's dark, scary, sad, Christmassy, enthralling, action-packed, romantic, and mysterious all at once. I know very little movies, and I've seen a lot of movies, but I know very little movies that are able to cover all of these tones in just one film. Like, sometimes you'll see a series of movies with each entry into that series having one of these tones be its main theme, but this one manages to juggle all of these themes in at once and still makes it one hell of an experience, and it never feels jumbled up. It feels like this movie could not work unless all these tones were there at once, and it's perfect because of it. And of course, I have to talk about Batman if I'm talking about a Batman movie, and in my personal opinion, Michael Keaton is the best Batman of all time. Now, as I mentioned, I was originally going to make a video solely dedicated to Michael Keaton's Batman, like I did for Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman, but then I realized I would have to make 2 videos instead of one longer video, which wouldn't make that much sense, so I'm just going to talk about him here instead. I hope that's okay with everybody. It's not because I'm lazy, it's that I just figure the Michael Keaton video isn't going to be that long, and I thought it would make more sense to just make one longer video. So, in the 80s, when people were talking about Michael Keaton being cast as Batman, like, at this point in his career, he had been known mostly for his comedic work in movies like Mr. Mom, and when people found out he was going to be Batman, the most instantly recognizable dark superhero on the planet, people hated it. They complained that Michael Keaton looked and acted nothing like how they'd envisioned Batman on the big screen. But that really ended up working in his favor because he doesn't look like what people would imagine from Batman, so it's a lot easier to believe that Bruce Wayne and Batman are 2 completely different people. Another thing I like about Keaton's Batman is that he doesn't try too hard to be intimidating. He just kind of is intimidating. He doesn't really talk when he's in his mask, but when he does, he barely changes his voice at all. He just slightly deepens it a little. Christian Bale's Batman kind of has a voice that sounds like he's trying too hard to be intimidating. Keaton's Batman just comes off as a threat, even though he barely says a word. As Bruce Wayne, he's very different from all the other versions of his secret identity that we've seen so far or since. He's not a cocky billionaire playboy who throws a bunch of parties and bangs a lot of women. He's a quiet and modest dude who keeps to himself. In the first Batman movie, he throws a party and doesn't even tell anybody who he is at his own party. He prefers to be in quiet and secluded places like the Batcave, thinking about stuff rather than pretending to have a good time when he's really not. It's because of this that Keaton's Batman comes off as being much more relatable than a lot of other versions. He's more of an average guy that happens to be rich. And that's another thing. I'm admittedly a bit of a sucker for characters without a lot of backstory. That's why I really used to like characters like Han Solo and Boba Fett in Star Wars or Kane in WWE. They were simply badass dudes that you didn't need to know a lot about. As soon as you heard all about their backstories, they lost their edge, in my opinion. A reason I don't like the Dark Knight trilogy is because they start the series by telling us Batman's origin story, which is fine since his origin is cool, but the problem is that they started that way, instead of just letting him be Batman for a while on screen and building up to his origin after we'd gotten to know him already. Keaton's Batman has that mystery to him. In the first Batman movie, he doesn't have his entire origin explained. The movie starts with him already as Batman, and only shows the briefest of glimpses at his past. Tim Burton smartly puts the focus more on Batman's villains, and builds up Batman himself very slowly and subtly. Undoubtedly, we would have learned a lot more about Bruce Wayne if Batman Continues was made, but as it stands, the less we knew about Bruce's past, the more badass and intimidating he came off as, and the more intrigued we became to see how this quiet and modest and awkward Bruce Wayne became the world's greatest detective. Now, this is not me saying that origin stories are always bad, because one of my favorite things about Catwoman is her origin story. I'm just saying that in some cases you can tell when characters you can just kind of tell when characters are better without an origin story, and I think Michael Keaton's Batman was a lot cooler without one, so I'm kind of glad that he never got one. Now, the villains. As great as Michael Keaton's Batman was, his villains always kind of stole the show in my opinion, particularly in Batman Returns. Max Shreck is a great original character with a more subtle evil plan of storing all of Gotham City's energy for himself. He cares about his legacy, sort of like Tywin Lannister, and he cares what he leaves behind for his golden boy's son Chip to inherit after him. Penguin, on the other hand, is much more over the top. The movie literally begins with his parents being horrified with their own son and just chucking him into the sewer to die. Immediately, you hate Penguin's parents, and you understand why he becomes the way he does. Even though he's scary and keeps you on the edge of your seat, worried about what he's going to do next, he's always a character that's easy to sympathize with. Even Max has his moments in this movie, like when Penguin tries to kidnap Chip, Max actually steps in and offers up himself to save his son's life. Max might have been a selfish jerk the whole movie, but at least he did one good thing. Penguin never got an opportunity to experience the world the way that he should have. As he said in the movie, he spent all his Christmases living in a sewer with a bunch of penguins and circus clowns, never knowing what it truly means to love or be loved in return. Not even knowing what his real name was, all because his parents were scared of him. And yeah, Penguin's definitely got his issues. His creepy, lustful nature makes the audience uncomfortable, and he's generally a terrifying and disgusting person who eats raw fish and bites people's noses, but his origin story humanizes him and almost makes it hard to completely root against him. You want him to learn his true name and have a good life. They literally had to make Penguin threaten to drown a bunch of young children and blow up 100,000 more people to actually make the audience fall and hate the dude. That takes real talent. His death at the end also feels legitimately sad. Even after all the evil stuff that he's done, you can't help but still feel a little bad for him, as his only true family, the Penguins, give him a proper burial in the water. But don't even get me started on Catwoman, because she's easily the best thing about the movie in my opinion. Or at least the best character. I'm not gonna lie, Catwoman, obviously, I think it might be fairly obvious at this point, I have a huge crush on this character. Like, massive crush. I cannot help blushing whenever I watch this movie. I really just love this character. She is my favorite superhero character, DC or Marvel, comics, video games, movies, it doesn't matter. Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman is my absolute favorite. Catwoman is hands down, in my opinion, the best character that Tim Burton ever created in a movie. I already made an entire video about her, so I'll keep this brief. Her new and improved origin story makes her sympathetic early on after Max literally tries to kill her. She has a completely understandable mental breakdown, and you can't help but feel bad for this girl, who hasn't had a consistent person to love her in her entire life. All the men leave her, and her mother does nothing but judge her. She works her damn ass off at work and can't even get an ounce of respect from her boss, who then tries to murder her. It's totally right that she would freak out eventually. Even though she becomes Catwoman for revenge on Max Schreck, it also helps her gain more confidence in herself, which is a real experience to see. Her voice, actually, if you only heard this movie, you would notice that her voice changes a lot as she becomes more sure of herself and less scared of trying new things. She gets better at expressing herself, and you can't help but kind of root for her. Her numerous quotes and her general badassness make her a difficult character to forget about. It's no surprise that she was supposed to get her own spin-off movie. The split personalities that she has make you feel really bad for her. You know that Max deserves to be punished, maybe even be killed for what he's tried to do to her, but you also know that she's grown so much as a person that you want her to settle down and have a warm and comfortable life with Bruce. Speaking of, the romance. Now, I already talked a lot about Bruce and Selina's outstanding chemistry in my other video, so once again I'll try to keep it brief. Batman is motivated by justice, and Catwoman is motivated by vengeance. Naturally, these two should be enemies, and they do fight a couple of times, admittedly, throughout the movie, but they also do have a lot in common with each other. They both carry dark sides to their normal, easygoing personalities. Bruce's parents were killed right in front of him as a small child, and Selina was literally murdered multiple times. They've each been traumatized and have reacted very similarly. But since you got the time to know both of these characters with and without their masks, you know that they each deserve happiness with each other. They're both scarred individuals who will always feel the greatest of comforts with each other. Alfred sort of plays the role of the audience during this scene where Bruce has to go to be Batman, and he's trying to tell Alfred what to say to Selina, and then Selina does the same thing a minute later. Alfred just goes wide-eyed because he, like the audience, realizes how similar they are to each other. After seeing the trouble that Selina has gone through and how happy she is with Bruce, you can't help but want these two to be together forever in his castle, just like in a fairy tale. When they see each other at the dance and they realize who the other truly is, Selina asks sadly if they have to start fighting each other. But Bruce doesn't say yes. He doesn't want to fight Selina because he loves Selina, and she loves him. The ending to this movie is a real tearjerker. This movie in general is essentially it's not essentially hokey, it's occasionally hokey. But that's okay. I think it's okay that it's hokey. It's a comic book movie. Comic book movies can be silly. Look at what Marvel's done with it. But I mean, like in the ending where Penguin sends out his minions wearing rockets to blow up parts of Gotham City, it's kind of silly. But superhero movies are a little silly in general. In the context of this universe, it's not surprising that we have to widen our minds a bit. But despite the zany master plan of Penguins, the ending is actually really sad. I just finished watching the movie, and I'm hoping I'm conveying the sadness I'm feeling right now after watching the ending. Selina confronts and she plans to kill Max Schreck in the sewers, but Batman shows up and he removes his mask. He pleads with Selina to let Max go. She's split between her two halves. She wants to go off with Bruce and live with him in his castle, just like in a fairy tale, but she knows that Max needs to die. We, the audience, know that maybe Max does deserve to die, but we still want Selina to go off and be happy with Bruce, even though it's unlikely. Ultimately, when she seemingly sacrifices herself to kill Max, the Penguin arrives and has a very sad death scene where he just kind of keels over. His penguins, who are essentially the only family he ever had, push him into the water. Even Bruce can't help but be enthralled by what he's just witnessed. Later on, when Bruce finds a black cat on the street and takes her in, you can't help but feel the sadness that he must be feeling because he misses Selina. He wanted to take her back home with him. You feel that sense of loss and wonder as Alfred says Merry Christmas, as the scene cuts to the bat signal and Catwoman staring at it from afar, being revealed to still be alive. But despite this, the ending is pretty emotional and, dare I say, tragic. It fills you up with a sense of optimism, though. Even though we were supposed to get sequels to this, it does end the series on a high note, with Catwoman being alive, Penguin having a good death, and Batman ultimately saving the day. While I still get depressed and legitimately teary-eyed knowing this relationship between Bruce and Selina will never properly end on screen, I still love this movie to death, and I've written tons of fan fiction on it. It's well-paced, it has beautiful music, has a dark, gothic, and tragic nature to it. It has horrific scenes, romantic scenes, badass action scenes, memorable and at sometimes very relatable villains, some much-needed awkward and funny moments to balance it all out, and a true sense of occasional comic book hokiness. And it managed to improve on its predecessor and set the bar too high for any of its sequels to ever overcome. And that's why I love Batman Returns and watch it every damn day, because it's worth watching every day. Honestly, I don't think that there's ever going to be a Batman movie that will top Batman Returns for me. It was just too emotional. Even the MCU has never made me feel emotions quite the way that Batman Returns has, with the exception of maybe Avengers Endgame. Besides Avengers Endgame, I've never felt emotion watching a superhero movie the way I've felt watching Batman Returns. This movie gets to me and legitimately makes me teary-eyed every time I watch it. Selina Kyle makes me blush. The ending makes me tear up. I feel a lot of genuine emotion when I watch this. With a lot of other superhero movies, I laugh at the occasional joke, but other than that, I'm kind of just watching it with no expressions or feelings. This movie is one of those rare exceptions, and you really don't see superhero movies quite like this anymore. And it's a damn shame because this is, in my opinion, the greatest Batman movie of all time, and definitely, absolutely, one of my favorite movies of all time and one of the best superhero movies of all time. It's incredibly underrated, and I cannot do this movie justice just talking about it in words. Just being honest here, if you haven't seen Batman Returns, then what are you waiting for? You have to go see this movie. Like, I'm not lying when I say I can't put this movie into words and still seem as good. Like, this movie absolutely needs to be seen to be believed. It really is that good. And every single day where I think about the sequels that we could have gotten, I get extremely depressed about it. But at least this movie leaves me with a sense of optimism. But of course, I am going to be making another video talking about what the Batman franchise could have been if Tim Burton had stuck around. So stay tuned for when I make that video. But if you enjoyed this video, remember to give the thumbs up, share this video with all of your friends and all of your various social media platforms. Let me know in the comments down below what I did and didn't do good. Ring that notification bell. And I will see all you dudes and chicks in the next video.